If you just accept that the British royal family are lizards from outer space, you can explain so much of their behavior. Yeah, that would actually explain a lot of their behavior. However, I don't trust your model. Like your consciousness, your intelligence is deeply familiar to you. That's a very deep self-deception. There's no consensus about what intelligence is. It's a question that has existential, ethical import to it. It is not the being of consciousness, it is the consciousness of being. It's the kind of intelligence that makes us the kind of beings we are. You can solve a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of ways. And it's the kind of intelligence we're trying to make now. An artificial intelligence that has what you have. What's going on in this course is we'll do the psychometric approach, the cognitive approach, the artificial intelligence, and then we see if it gives us potential promising insights of connections we could make and explore. General intelligence is actually essential because if your IQ is too low, you know what happens to you? You die. So welcome. We're going to explore the nature of intelligence, and ultimately from a cognitive science perspective. And you may not know what that means, but give me some time. Now I'm going to start with a bit of a disclaimer that might say, well, what's the point of the course then? Because what I'm going to start with is there's no consensus about what intelligence is. Contrary to the way people talk about it online, there's no clear consensus about it. Many researchers think that it's a mystery. They'll even use that word. Well, and on the other hand, you have many researchers making strong identity claims about what intelligence is. Intelligence is X, intelligence is Y. And so that tells you the state that we're in. I should mention that this course will integrate very well with another course I've done for the Peterson Academy on intelligence, rationality, wisdom, and spirituality, and also another course called The Primacy of Beauty, which some of you were students of, and it's a great pleasure to see many of you back. So, do we just stop then? Is that it? Well, no, we need to answer this question. It's really central to our understanding of who and what we are, and it's becoming a pressing question with the advent, or at least what may be plausibly claimed to be the advent of artificial general intelligence, which we will talk about in this course. So what is intelligence? What are we talking about? What do we mean by it? So what am I going to do? I'm going to review some of the best theories and best empirical research and make the best argument I can for what I think intelligence is. So I'm going to spend a lot of time on formulating the problem today. And as you will see from lecture 3, formulating the problem well is a big part of what it is to be an intelligent agent. What do I mean in terms of this problem formulation by giving you my best argument? What do I mean by my best argument? Well, I'm going to give you a strong plausibility argument and a cognitive scientific argument. So first of all, what do I mean by plausibility? And so this is based on work that I'm going to that's going to come out this year on the nature of plausibility. And there's two meanings to plausibility. One is just a synonym for high probability. And in that sense, I'm not talking about it. We have a good term for probability. It's called probability. Instead, I want to use plausibility, which is another term for another distinct meaning, which is when a claim makes good sense. It should be taken seriously. It's convinced me that I understand it well. And it seems like, there could be truth there. It's reasonable to reflect upon it. I want to talk about what I think plausibility is and what kind of argument you make in order to make a plausible argument. Probability is our best estimation of where we'll find truth. Plausibility is our best estimation of where we will find probability. Okay, so that's how we're doing it. Now, one of the first books to really talk about this explicitly was Plausible Reasoning by Rescher from 1976. And he made a very good point that one factor of plausibility is we want convergence from multiple independent sources. So this is why you or even infants prefer multisensory information. You want convergence. So if you can only see something, you're not very sure. It might be real, but it might be an illusion. But if you can see it and touch it, right? If you can see it and touch it and hear it, then it's very probably real. And even from a young child, you're making use of that. Now, why does that make sense? Because if you have just one channel, the chance that your subjective bias is resulting in your conclusion, your model, quite high. But the chance that all of these share the same bias, much lower. So what convergence does is it gives you what Rescher calls trustworthiness. Trustworthiness is good reason to believe that the probability of the effect of subjective bias and distortion has been significantly reduced. Now, trustworthiness is not probability. You have to establish that empirically. And trustworthiness is certainly not certainty. But trustworthiness is important. And that's why you see children, even very young children, using it. So you have convergence for trustworthiness. You're going to see me making these kinds of convergence moves, trustworthiness. Now, if you take a look at the work of Kyle and other people from the psychology of explanation and other people from the philosophy of science, work on understanding, you get the fact that we actually like this, but we like something else too, and we like to have the two together. We also like, and scientists will often refer to their theories this way, we want something that has elegance. We want our model to go into many different areas, find, formulate, and solve problems for us. This is why we like things like force equals mass times acceleration. We can use it to explain, how a blue whale is floating. We can use it to explain the movement of the Earth around the sun. We can use it to explain, why a balloon is floating. We can use it to explain what happens if you crash into a brick wall with your car, and so on and so on and so forth. We can go into all of these on a superficial examination, disparate areas, and we can find and formulate and solve our problems there. It's a very powerful theory, which of course is why we like elegance. Elegance makes our theories powerful. It gives us a lot of explanatory power. And one of the ways we judge reality is how much explanatory power does it have. So we think this is a very real thing, equals mc squared, because we think it explains so much and it gives us great power. With this, we can take a paperclip's worth of matter and we can smash a city to the ground. That's impressive, okay? So elegance gives us power, and power is one of the things we also use to judge the realness. Now, from Elijah Milgram's work on practical induction, he has a book by that name, and he has essays around this. He made a point that we actually want a balance between what he called these backward and our forward commitments. What if you just had a lot of convergence, but very little elegance? What is that? That is to state something that people regard as very trustworthy, but doesn't have much power. Like, you know what? When people are hungry, they seek food. How many of you doubt that? How many of you were like, oh, wow, that's going to change my whole understanding? Does very little. It's not false. It's trivial. It's trivial. And if you read through scientific articles, certain claims will be dismissed as not being false, but as being trivial. What about the other one? What about if I have very little convergence, but a lot of elegance? So I've got a model that explains a lot, but you don't have a lot of trust in the model. These are conspiracy theories. One of my favorite I like to use is, if you just accept that the British royal family are lizards from outer space, you can explain so much of their behavior. And it's like, yeah, that would actually explain a lot of their behavior. However, I don't trust your model. How did you come up with that? And so what you have there, this is triviality. This is far-fetched. This is far-fetched. So what we want is we want a balance between these. Now notice what plausibility is doing. It's helping us zero in and take seriously because it's helping us ignore triviality and ignore far-fetched. Okay, is that everything we need? No. There's important properties of the model. So from Murphy and Medine and ongoing, we've learned a lot about people's concepts, their internal models of the world. 1985. He pointed out something very important. We don't want a feature list. What do I mean by that? It's interesting because people think that what they have in their head is a feature list. So if you ask people what a bird is, they'll say, feathers, wings, a beak, flies. Oh, yeah, that's a bird. Okay, so I'm going to put some feathers here, a couple of wings, a beak, gather it all together, throw it in the air. And that's not a bird. It's a low-budget horror movie. Okay, so what's missing? Well, what's missing is a structural functional organization that shows how all the features hang together so the bird operates as a causal whole so you can predict and explain its behavior. It has to be coherent. And that coherence allows you to rule out things that don't fit the structure and rule in things. Oh, yes, this belongs in, this fits in. And so you have coherence. And what that does is it allows you to use the model predictively and in an explanatory fashion. So what we want is can we get a convergence of a lot of different theories and empirical findings to get to a coherent model of what intelligence is that has a lot of explanatory power that is balanced by a lot of convergence trustworthiness. That's the argument I'm going to make. It's going to be exactly that style of argument. So I'm not just going to say strong argument. This is half of what I mean by a strong argument. I mean a plausibility argument. And that's how we're going to do this. So at times it'll be like, what is he doing? And then you'll see, oh, he's doing this, and then that. Oh, and it keeps coming. Oh, right, the convergence. I see. All right. So keep your eyes sort of open for that. And the next one is I'm going to give you ultimately a cognitive scientific argument, because I actually think that's one of the best ways of getting the most plausibility in a model of intelligence. Now, what's cognitive science? So cognitive science is a discipline that sort of took off in the 70s and, of course, is now a big deal. I'm currently the director of the cognitive science program at the University of Toronto. Very proud of that. I've been, working in that and for that program for, it was 1993. Wow, it's a long time. Okay, anyways, I've been doing that. I'm very proud of it. Now, what is cognitive science? Well, you can open the calendar and you'll get the very dry, useless, well, cognitive science is the interdisciplinary study of the mind, making use of blah, 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 blah. And you go, what? Who cares? It sounds like, you're going on a buffet and I have a little bit of psychology and a little bit of philosophy. And that's not what it is. At least that's not what I argue cognitive science is or should be. Instead, I want to go through something more carefully and make an argument for you. And we're going to see some of this in this course, which is the point. So you have neuroscience. It's going to say what it thinks intelligence is. And what it's going to do is it's going to study the brain. And how's it going to study the brain? It's going to use EEG and fMRIs and some really new, exciting technologies, right? And we'll just put like fMRI here because that's the one that people really like a lot, fMRI. Make sure, by the way, you're very careful about this. So a quick aside, you take a study you get published, you have a paper, you've written it up, you want to get it published, you submit it to a bunch of journals, you can't get it published. You take the same study, you don't change it at all, and you put in some fMRI pictures, and then it gets published. Okay? People have an incorrect understanding of what these pictures are. They think they're snapshots of the brain. They are not like that. They are highly processed statistical averages of a lot of different measurements, etc. I'm not saying they're useless. I'm not saying that. They're important and they're relevant. But you have to be careful about them. Second thing, there's been a lot of recent meta-analyses where people have gone back and looked at these studies, and many of them have too small of a number of participants in order to provide enough statistical power for the claims that are made. Doesn't mean they're false. It means we need to do more. Okay, so take the fMRI stuff as, wow, it's not like the courtroom where, I did it. Like, it's not a confession, right? You have to take it as a part of information. It's kind of evidence, but it has to be fit in with a lot of other stuff. Okay, let's go back. And what do the neuroscientists talk about? Well, they talk about brain networks, right? And they'll talk about two types. They'll talk about anatomical ones, and they'll talk about functional ones. They will talk about particular theories. One theory we're going to look at of a kind of network is called the PFIT, the parietal frontal integration theory, okay? And so that's what you're doing. Oh, is that it? Well, no, because the problem is we've got a whole other discipline that is talking about intelligence right now, and it's actually dominating the airwaves and the social media, and that's artificial intelligence. If they're succeeding, they must be figuring out something about the nature of intelligence, we would think. Maybe, maybe not. Now, artificial intelligence, John, I get that. What's this? Well, this is the project that people are gung-ho about right now. This is artificial general intelligence. They're trying to get a artificial intelligence that has what you have. And we're going to come back to this again and again and again. You have general intelligence. You can solve a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of domains in a wide variety of ways. And currently we have no machine that is close to that, although the LLMs, the large language models like ChatGPT-4, seem to be getting closer to being able to be generally intelligent. Okay, so put a pin in that. We're going to come back to this idea. This is crucial. And notice the fact that they are moving in this direction tells you that general intelligence is actually essential to understanding our kind of intelligence. Okay, now what do? Well, they don't study brains at all. They do learning algorithms. They generate simulations. They make models. And what do they say to us? Well, they'll say things like maybe intelligence is features of deep learning. Some of you might have heard that with respect to ChatGPT. Deep learning is going on, and that's what makes it so intelligent. Massive reinforcement. We're going to talk about that. Notice if we just talked about this, we would be missing all of this. And if we just talked about this, we would be missing all of this. Is that enough? No, there's a whole group of people that have been talking about intelligence for a much longer time than those other two. And those are the psychologists. The philosophers have been talking about it for a very long time, but we'll bring them in at another point, okay? But you get psychology. Well, what is psychology doing? Well, it's studying behavior. Sometimes it's behavior and experience. There's a lot of sort of question about what psychology is actually studying. And of course, they run experiments and they do statistical analyses. And then what do they conclude? Well, they'll conclude things like intelligence is working memory. WM, please remember, working memory. What's working memory? We'll get to that. But working memory isn't something you can just crack open the skull and say, oh, look, there's working memory. It's an abstract model. It's not the same thing as one of these things because it's not running on a computer. It's based on and derived from all the data that come from these behavioral experiments. Now notice, this is like different countries. This is different levels of reality, different levels of analysis, different methods, and different theoretical entities. All talking about intelligence. We should try and get them, well, first of all, to converge. What if we don't trying to get them to converge. What do we face? Well, we face the problem of equivocation, because if I ask you what intelligence is, you can give me 3, 4, 5, not only different answers, but different kinds of answers. And that means the same term has multiple different meanings. And the problem with that is human beings very readily fall into fallacious reasoning when they face equivocation, especially if they don't notice the equivocation. So here's one of my favorites, okay? Nothing is better than long life and happiness. But a peanut butter and jelly sandwich is better than nothing. Ergo, a peanut butter jelly sandwich is better than long life and happiness. So you should eat one and then kill yourself. Now it's like, wait, what's going on there? Well, what's going on is I'm equivocating on the term nothing. I'm using two different meanings. Nothing from the set of things that makes life worth living, and then nothing from the set of things you eat. Very different meanings of nothing. But if I don't pay attention to the two meanings, I get a ridiculous, fallacious argument. Equivocation is a big, big problem in the disciplines that study the mind. One of the most equivocal words that's used in a lot of this, although a lot of people are also very careful to avoid the equivocation, so I want to be balanced here, is the word information. There's very different, many different, a very technical mathematical meaning of information and an everyday meaning of information. We want to avoid equivocation. We want to avoid equivocation. Is there anything else we should be worrying about here? Yeah, well, the problem with this is it's really unlikely that these different levels of reality are not interacting with each other in significant ways. That's highly implausible. It's highly unlikely that they do not causally affect or constrain each other, condition each other in important ways. Which means if these disciplines remain isolated from each other, we are missing all of this important bottom-up, top-down causation, constraint, conditioning. We're missing important information. And of course, that means we're not getting the structural functional organization that holds all of these different kinds of features together. We're getting a very equivocal, very complete feature list. And there's a good possibility that it's actually incoherent. We don't know how they all fit together. When you have that kind of incompleteness and incoherence in your model, it's highly likely that it's false in very important ways. So you need to make sure you are pursuing a way of integrating the work from these different disciplines. I call this synoptic. Synoptic means looking over the whole thing. Synoptic integration. You need synoptic integration. Now, what would be really good is if the synoptic integration got all three of these to converge in important ways, and then that convergent model was elegant and powerful and fed back and found and solved problems in each one of these. That would be a very powerful thing to do. That's exactly what we're going to be looking for. So you're seeing how the plausibility and the cognitive scientific synoptic integration are feeding together? And you may be wondering, well, where is philosophy in all of this? Philosophers have been talking about intelligence and its relationship to rationality and wisdom since, well, philosophy. So the problem we have is philosophy has a bit of a bad rap. It's sort of misrepresented. Many people think it's just sort of giving your opinion with a French accent and smoke a cigarette or something like that. It is not the being of consciousness, it is the consciousness of being. You understand, right? And no, I mean, that's not a very good model of the role that philosophy plays in cognitive science. See, what philosophy does is philosophy is a practice of trying to come up with a shared conceptual vocabulary, a shared theoretical grammar, so that all of these disciplines can talk to each other in mutually transformative and insightful ways. And that's what we're going to be doing as well. We're going to be trying, can we build a shared conceptual vocabulary? Can we build a shared theoretical grammar for how we put the concepts together that will allow all of these different disciplines to talk to each other? That will afford convergence, and hopefully that synoptically integrated model with the new vocabulary and the new grammar will be elegantly powerful. If we could do all that, big if, and I'm a little bit like, it's a big if. But if we do that, that would be a strong argument as to what intelligence is. So I'm just going to make a strong argument. No, I've told you specifically how I'm going to make a strong argument because of what I mean by what a strong argument is. It's a plausible argument and it's a cognitive scientific argument. Does that make sense? Okay. So that's exactly what we're going to be doing. So just to give you a quick overview of what we'll be doing in the course, we're going to look at psychological theories. We're going to look at neuroscientific theories. We're going to look at this cognitive scientific theories that try to integrate those together. Okay? When we do psychology, there's going to be two parts. There's going to be psychometrics, and I'll tell you what all this means in a minute. There's going to be cognitive theories. Okay? So there's two parts. I'm going to go through the psychology, both parts, what do they converge on, then neuroscience, what's going on between the psychology and the neuroscience, then and then we go into the artificial intelligence, and then we try and draw it all together in the AI. So we're going to go through all those levels. Now, before we do that, first, I want to draw a couple lessons from cognitive science. We've been doing cognitive science for a while, and we've learned some lessons from that about what we should be doing that are very relevant to talking about intelligence. One is, like all scientific theories, we want theories that generalize. Generalize means that I can apply, it's powerful, I can apply the same theory in many different domains. It applies generally. That makes it a very powerful theory. Okay, that's what science is after. But we want a specific kind of power. We want it to generalize in a way that takes into account what's called multiple realizability. Multiple realizability. I will often just use MR. It doesn't mean Mr. It means multiple realizability. Okay. Well, you're saying, well, why? Well, just think about what we've talked about. I want to do cognitive science in the sense that I want to generate a theory that generalizes to human intelligence. Obviously, what's human intelligence? But are humans the only organisms that are intelligent? No. I need a theory of intelligence that should generalize also to chimps. It should generalize even to an octopus. And octopuses are like from outer space. They are weird. Their brain doesn't look the way ours does. It's right. They have a brain, but they have more neurons actually in their tentacles. And it's like, what's it like to be an octopus? You see, they're highly intelligent. They can solve problems that even dogs can't solve. And they're really sneaky about it too. Right? I love octopus. Octopi, octopuses. I think it's octopuses, actually. Now, what's the thing? Why am I saying this? Well, I can't get too specific about intelligence in the sense of saying it's a property of a specific human brain. Because maybe the chimp brain, and even more likely, maybe the octopus's brain doesn't have those structures. Yet somehow they have very powerful intelligence. It's like, oh, wait, I need a theory that's abstract enough that it'll talk about humans and chimps and octopuses. And it gets even worse? No, even more demanding. Because what about artificial intelligence? What's it running on? It's not running on anything like a brain at all. It's running on, circuit boards using electricity and yet these LLMs are holding conversations with you. It's like, whoa, I need a theory of intelligence that might not even, I want a theory of intelligence that isn't bound to talking about human brain structures, because that won't allow me to understand how the LLMs and other AI is intelligent. Intelligence is multiply realizable. It shows up in many different domains. And you may think, that's a really weird property. Well, no. Let's talk about this. And we'll need this. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing, because this will also help us to understand what do we mean by a computational model when we do the AI section. Okay, so how many of you know what chess is? You all know what chess is? Okay, it's not some sort of weird thing. You can tell when people don't know what something is. Like if you go in an archaeological museum and they don't know what it is, they'll have the object there. They don't know what it is. So they'll say ceremonial object. That means they don't know what it is, okay? So chess is not a ceremonial object. You know what it is. And I'm playing chess with somebody. Let's say I'm playing chess with Andrew, right? And we're playing the game, and I'm starting to lose. And I pick up his queen, and I snap it and throw it away. And I go, aha! And he goes, no problem. And he sort of takes out a coin. In Canada, and we still do, we used to have pictures of Queen Elizabeth on the coin, the front of the coin, by the way, not the back of the coin. And he says, this will be my queen. And he puts it on the board, and he starts using it as a queen. And, what? And I pick up the coin and throw it away. And he goes, okay. And he says, this rock. He picks up the rock, and he puts it on there, and he starts, and I can't deal with his sorcery. And he's too powerful. And I go, how does he do that? But I'm making a mistake. I'm making a mistake, because you can play chess with pieces of wood, pieces of metal, pieces of plastic, pieces of stone. You can even get a whole bunch of helicopters together, put flags on them, and get them moving around rooftops, and you can play helicopter chess. You can be on different sides of the world, and all you're doing is sending letters and numbers to each other through the internet, and you're playing a game of chess. See, chess is multiply realizable. As long as you can play the game, as long as you can run the functions, it doesn't matter what it's made out of. Does that make sense? In fact, this would be a significant mistake. You're watching people playing chess, and you wait till they're done, and you get the pieces, and you go home, and you go, I'm going to figure out chess. I'm going to do a chemical analysis on these pieces, and that'll tell me what chess is and how chess works. And you go, well, you're not getting chess. Chess is multiply realizable. We know, at least it's very, very plausible, that intelligence is multiply realizable. So we have to be very, very careful to not just simply say intelligence is brain process X, or human brain process Y, or human brain structure Z. We need a theory of intelligence that properly generalizes and takes into account multiple realizability. This is going to be important. This is going to be very important, because we're going to see that some theories tend to get too bound to their specific level and forget that intelligence is existing at multiple levels and it is multiply realizable. So we're going to need a very distinct kind of theory there. Is that okay? Does that make sense? Okay, so remember that. The second lesson, we have to avoid what's called the homuncular fallacy. It sounds important. Right? Latin must be important. The homuncular fallacy. So homunculus is a little man. Little man. What? Little man fallacy? What does that mean? Okay, so when I was a kid, and it bothered me even as a kid, by the way, but I was a weird kid, so that's okay. I was watching a Disney film before Disney became whatever it is now, right? And it was one of these shorts that Disney used to make trying to explain how things work, sort of science for kids by Disney, right? And it was like, well, this is how vision works. So there's a triangle out there in the world. It makes light. The light goes into the eye. It travels as information, and then they equivocate on information. It goes into your mind, and there's, right, little screen there, and there's a triangle on there, and the little man recognizes it, and he goes, triangle. And that's how you see a triangle. And you go, wait, that's not an explanation. You're telling me that how vision works is I have a little guy inside of me that has vision. How does the little guy see? Oh, well, inside his mind, there's an even littler. You can just get an infinite regress. You don't get an explanation. It's like somebody gives you a check for $1,000 and you go to the bank to cash it and all they give you is another check. And you keep going up from bank to bank to bank and it never cashes out. You never get what is it. And you may think, nobody makes that mistake. Oh yeah, they do. You'll see it. You'll see it. People will try to explain intelligence in terms of processes that are themselves intelligent cognitive agencies. Now that tells us something we have to do. We have to do the following. We must explain intelligence ultimately in terms of principles and processes that are not themselves intelligent or intelligent agents. And before you think, wow, can we do that? Well, think about, this isn't exactly the same thing, but it shows you the principle I'm talking about. How did intelligence come to be here? Now, for a long time, people thought you had to have intelligence to make intelligence. You had to have an intelligent designer, aka God, and that is the being that was responsible for making intelligence. And by the way, for a very long time, that's not a stupid argument. But then Darwin came along. And what Darwin showed is you could get a process that was not itself an intelligent agent, evolution, that could actually design and create intelligent beings. Oh. So it is possible to explain the emergence of intelligence from processes that are not themselves intelligent. Now that's a cross speciation, but that means it is in principle possible to explain intelligence in terms of processes that are not themselves intelligent. Okay, so we want generalizabilities that include multiple realizability and avoid the homuncular fallacy. We're going to be doing all of that as we try to build a plausible cognitive scientific theory of intelligence. And you're probably saying, okay, can we get to it? Can we get? We had to do all this work. Why? Because remember what I said at the beginning, intelligence is controversial. I don't mean in sort of the public media sense. I mean it's scientifically, intellectually controversial. And so we have to build a very careful framework so we are properly responsible to that controversy. And we can give a strong and clear answer about what we propose intelligence is. So, as I said, we're going to start with the psychology, and there's two parts of it, the psychometric part and cognitive. And of course, cognitive is part of cognitive science, and that's why I'm here. Okay. So, psychometric, metron, geometry, measuring the earth. This is you're measuring the psyche. This is how we measure the psyche. There's lots of psychometric tests. We can give you psychometric tests to determine your personality structure. Are you high in openness? I think you are, by the way. Are you high in openness? Are you high in conscientiousness? You've heard all of that. I can do psychometric tests to determine your attachment style. Are you securely attached in your relationships? Are you anxiously attached? Are you avoidantly attached? These are all powerful. We also have been doing, and the one we've been doing it for the longest for, psychometric tests, since basically the end of the 19th century, in fact, we've been doing psychometric tests on intelligence. Now, those tests are almost exclusively, although people have been doing some recent stuff that's interesting. I've seen one on dogs, and I'll talk about one on mice. But generally, the psychometric tests have been done on human beings because the concern with the psychometric test is to explain within species variation. First of all, is it the case that she is more intelligent than him? I don't know. I'm not making any claims here. But we can ask that question, and then can we give a plausible, clear answer to that question? Well, what would I need to do? I would need to measure her intelligence, his intelligence, with some good measure and use that to compare their intelligence. That's the main goal. And you may say, why do we want to do that? Isn't that going to lead to the oppression of human beings and things like that? Okay, there has been a bad history of IQ tests being used inappropriately. They've been used to, enforce eugenics programs and racist, I don't know what you even call them. I don't want to dignify them with any other term. Racist projects sounds like something legitimate. Okay, but that has been the misuse of this. I wrote a textbook chapter on intelligence for a textbook, and I go through that history. I'm not going to do that because we're not doing the history of psychometric testing of intelligence. But what I want to say about that is the following. All of that is the case, but it's not the case now. What do I mean by that? The measurement of intelligence has taken into account those factors and repeatedly been self-correcting to try and reduce the impact of those factors on this testing. We're now even doing the testing cross-culturally in significant ways. And you go, okay, and here's what I want you to hear. There is no other measure anywhere that has gone through the same amount of self-correction. Those other measures I told you about, personality, little bit cross-cultural, attachment, not very much at all. So yes, measurements of intelligence have been used for evil purposes, but that has precisely, strongly motivated, reliable corrections to the measurement of intelligence. So I would say you can make a good case that in comparison to many other of our psychometric measures, it is free from those biases. Is anything ever completely free from them? No. But that can't be the standard we hold anything to, or we're not doing any science whatsoever. So what I'm saying is, I acknowledge this evil, and all of the good researchers acknowledge it as well. And then they point to the fact that we have had decades and decades of, over a century now, of improving the tests to deal with those criticisms. Is that okay? So putting aside evil, why else might you want to measure people's intelligence? Well, you might want to measure people's intelligence to give them guidance in their academic careers. In fact, we'll see this in a minute, that's the original motivation for the first test that had some predictive power to it, trying to help children in their academic choices. And you might say that's unfair, but you could make an equal argument, and I'm not going to get into this argument. It's also unfair to not tell them what their intelligence might be, because then you're keeping from them information that's strongly predictive of their capacity for doing certain things. For example, the US Army makes you take an IQ test, and if you're too low, you're not allowed in. Why? Because if your IQ is too low, you know what happens to you? You die. And you know what a lot of people don't want to do? Die. Okay, so you have to be you can't be simplistic about this. You have to take it with very, very nuanced and sophisticated framework. Okay, so here we're doing within species, the human species variation. What are cognitive theories? Cognitive theories are not measurements, although there will be measurements, like obviously in things like experimental data. But what I mean is their project is not just to measure intelligence. Their project is to explain intelligence. What is intelligence? What are the cognitive processes and principles that are at work when we make somebody intelligent? Because here's the thing, the psychometric tests don't really answer that question. They just say, there's intelligence there, and he has more of it than she does. When you say, well, what does he have? And they'll say, intelligence. And you'll say, but what is intelligence? What he has more of. And it goes in that circle. You want to break out of that circle, obviously. And what the cognitive theories do is they attempt to explain what are the principles and processes at work in intelligence. Okay, so you have the psychological approach, which comprises both of these. This is the psychometric and the cognitive. Now, this is in contrast to the categorical. This is based on an unpublished manuscript that I did with Zach Irving a while ago. I should try and get it published. You're always trying to do 17,000 things. What does categorical mean? It means that I'm really taking seriously multiple realizability. I want to come up with an account that explains not differences between individuals within a species, but differences between species, or allows me to talk about human intelligence and AI in a way that makes good comparative and principled sense. So now I'm trying to figure out what are the characteristics that allow anything to go into the category intelligent. And there, AI and biology play a very significant role. Because I want to know, like, what's going on in the octopus? I want to know what's going on in ChatGPT-4. How is that like and unlike what's going on in human beings? Now, of course, and this is the argument I've already made, we want an integrated account of all of this. Because to miss any of it is to have a radically incomplete account of what intelligence is. So we're going to do psychology. We're going to start with the psychometrics. We're going to go into the cognitive. Then we're going to do the neuroscientific, and then we'll move into artificial intelligence. And that is how we will keep expanding the size of the category we're considering. Is that okay? Does that make sense? Intelligence, people began trying to measure intelligence in the late 19th century. Started with a guy named Galton. He was a cousin of Charles Darwin, and he thought sort of people's ability to make sensory discriminations, like distinguish between the weights of things or the sounds of things, was how you measure intelligence. There's another guy by the name of Cattell. He was trying to see sort of sensory motor abilities and other abilities, and he thought by measuring them, he was influenced by Galton, you could measure intelligence. Now, both of these were failures because the various tests didn't predict each other, which means they're not measuring the same thing. And they didn't predict how people would behave in areas that everybody agrees requires intelligence, like school. It's like, oh, so that sort of failed, that project. Now, Binet and Simon in the late 1800s, and by 1906 when they published, they were doing something else. They, in fact, made a very important move that was going to be crucial to all of the psychometric testing on intelligence. They said, we're not going to look at those low-level factors because they're not getting at what intelligence is. What we want to do is we want to find those things that reliably predict how well kids are going to do in school. Because everybody agrees school is a place that requires intelligence. And what we're going to do is we're going to find measures that reliably predict how well people are going to do in schools. And this is what this is the first thing that set their psychometrics apart from Galton and Cattell, was that they were successful in producing measures that reliably predicted how kids would do in school. And what they did is they shifted, in order to get it to be predictively reliable, they shifted off these low-level measures to what they called skills of judgment, which is much more abstract and quite vague notion. And what did they mean by this? Directing thought to steps to complete a task, like directing, so you go through step by step, adopting a correct strategy for solving a problem, accurately monitoring your performance. And what they were actually doing was shifting intelligence testing to problem solving. How do people solve problems? Abstract problems. And this becomes the crucial thing for all psychometric testing. How do human beings solve these sort of abstract problems? So when we talk about that, we face a problem. Sorry for the pun. And I'm going to make a point now, and we're going to come back and do this point much more in detail when we do artificial intelligence, because this distinction really matters to artificial intelligence. But there's two kinds of problems. Right now, we'll just do it intuitively. We'll come back and make it more specific, okay? So I want you to compare these two kinds of problems. A multiplication problem, like 33 times 25. Wow, that's a really bad 3. How many of you could do that? How many of you can do that? I hope all of you, right? Now, And you can reliably predict that you'll probably get it right, yes? Now, what kind of problem is it? Well, that's the thing, you know what kind of problem is. It's a multiplication problem. It tells you immediately what kind of problem it is and what kind of things you're supposed to do. You know, in fact, you probably didn't even consider it, that singing is irrelevant to solving this problem. You go, well, what I'll do is I'll sing. What's that going to do? That's not going to do anything. Not relevant. You also know what the goal is going to look like. You know what's going to end up here. You know it's not going to be the best picture of a penguin that anybody has ever made. That doesn't answer the problem. What has to go here? There has to be a number. It has to be a number that's bigger than these two numbers. I can take this number and divide it by this number and get this number. You have all these very clear constraints and guidance as to what you're supposed to do. Does that make sense? This is called a well-defined problem. Other people call it analytic problem. There's many different namings for this. One of the problems in psychology is called the jingle-jangle problem. We give multiple names to the same thing. Now, I want you to compare that to another kind of problem, the one you're facing right now, taking good notes. What does it look like at the beginning? I have a blank page. Is that very helpful? No, because a blank page is the beginning of a lot of different things. It's like, whoa. Well, what should I do? Well, I should write stuff down. Well, which stuff? If you look at her notes and his notes and her notes, will they all look the same? No. And some of them will have non-words, and they'll have arrows or stars or underlining or capitalization, or there'll be indentation. And what's going on here? Okay. And what's the result look like? Well, good notes. And what do those look like, given all the variation? And then you'll give me synonyms. You'll say, I'll have captured the key information, the crucial information. What you mean is you've zeroed in on the relevant information. Now notice, you don't know, like when you're starting it, you don't really know, you don't have much guidance from your starting point what you should be doing. You're not really clear what the goal state looks like. You don't know what the operations are. Maybe singing in your head is actually good for taking notes. I don't know. When I was studying, I used to play music for certain things because then when I was taking the exam, I would remember that song and it would help me remember it. There you go. That was good taking notes. These are ill-defined problems. Here's my favorite, it's my favorite example, although I hate going through it, of an ill-defined problem. So I'm much older, so there's been multiple times in my life when my relationships have ended and I find myself single, and then after the appropriate grieving, I go back into the wonderful world of dating. And I hate dating because you're either rejecting or being rejected. And human beings hate both of those. And I hate both of them pretty much equally. And so here's the problem. Go on a successful first date. And you know it's an ill-defined problem because your friends give you useless advice that sounds important. So I'm straight, and I'm just going to do it from that orientation because that's what I am, right? So look into her eyes, but not too much. Try to be funny, but not too much. Ask questions, but not too many. Lean in, but not too often. And I realized that no matter what, they could say to me later, I told you so. Now, here's the important point. In your education in school, and what are Benet and Simon training people for? School. You're given a lot of well-defined problems. What's the world made up of mostly? Ill-defined problems. So this is a problem that haunts psychometry of intelligence, which is we test people on well-defined problems to try and predict how well they will do on ill-defined problems. Now, we've had success at this. I'm not saying it's all a waste, but we're going to come back to this issue again and again and again. Okay? Now, why are Benet and Simon using well-defined problems? What's the reason? They are eminently measurable. You can measure these because they're so well-defined. You can measure that was the right answer, that was the wrong answer, that took you too much time, etc. Like, does that work for ill-defined problems? Like, how much time are you supposed to take on a first date? Well, less than a year. Okay, right? How do you know if you got it right or wrong? In fact, that's one of the most, like, even if the person says they want to see you again, that doesn't mean your first date was successful. I learned that. Oh, somebody's just being kind. Okay. So 2 reasons. They're testing kids on the problems, the kinds of problems they're going to meet in school, well-defined problems, and those well-defined problems give them what they need. They're highly measurable. They're highly measurable. So this is why well-defined problems are given significant priority from the very beginning in the psychometrics of intelligence. There are some important researchers on intelligence, Robert Sternberg is one of them, who emphasize we need to revise our tests so that we include more ill-defined problems. He talks about successful intelligence, which would include the ability to not only solve well-defined problems, but to solve ill-defined problems. I think this is important. He's taken seriously, but I don't know if his work is strong enough to garner any significant consensus. So he's making the point well, people acknowledge it, but I don't think he's actually significantly solved the problem. Okay, so let's go back now to what came out of all of this research. So Binet and Simon are doing it, and the tests are getting revised. Remember I said there's this long history of revision. It keeps going, by the way. And we got to the work of somebody who is going to give us a central phenomena for intelligence, and this is Spearman. And so Spearman is publishing in 1904, 1923, 1930. And what did he find? He found something that's really interesting, and it goes a lot against a lot of our sort of current cultural tropes. He found that how kids were doing in any one subject at school was strongly predictive of how they would do on all the other subjects. And we have tropes that, if you're good at sports, you can't be good at art. And if you're good at art, you can't be good at math. And of course, people do have talents. Nobody's going to deny that. But that claim is actually false. I'm like when I'm sparring with somebody as a martial artist, I don't want somebody who's really smart. They're deadly. Like they're dangerous. Right? So he found this. And what he started to do is he started to give more specific tests, and he kept getting evidence for this strong positive manifold. How I do on A is predictive of how I do on B, which is predictive of how I do on A. This is predictive of how I do on C. So is A. C is predictive of B. Do you see what I'm talking about? Each part predicts how you're going to do on all the others. You have a strong positive manifold. So this became known as G, the general factor of intelligence. There seems to be some general factor at work. Now, of course, you have intelligence that's specific to riding a bike and things like that. But the idea is, but there's a general factor. Here's something to think about. Maybe this general factor is responsible for the fact that you're a general domain problem solver. You have general intelligence. Remember, you can solve a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of domains. Well, that's what's happening here. G is showing kids, and eventually adults, because the testing spread, are capable of solving a wide variety of problems in a wide variety of manners, plausibly using the same something to do it. Oh, that's really interesting. That's really, really interesting. So he understood G as reflecting reasoning. Now, we have a problem with this term because it's equivocal. Oh, I know what reasoning is. Do you? Because there's a difference between well-defined and ill-defined reasoning. What's well-defined? Well-defined reasoning is deduction and induction. Deduction is what we do in logic. All men are mortal. Socrates is a man, therefore Socrates is mortal. There you go. That's deduction. And we have a really clear formal system for what that is. Induction. We have a very clear formal system for that. It's called probability theory. Great. So these are well-defined forms of reasoning. Is that the reasoning you mostly do? No, it's not. Okay, so we've talked about a great scientist here, Darwin, and how Darwin beat out Paley. Paley was the guy who argued intelligent design. Now, how did Paley argue that creatures have their design based on an intelligent designer? Well, he said, well, here's the animal. I'm not going to try and draw an animal. I don't claim to be an artist. That's an animal. Just accept it. Okay? That's a goat. And what do you know about goats? They're really well designed for where they live and how they live. Okay? And it's like, well, what could make a goat? Could erosion make a goat? You know, the way the Grand Canyon is made by erosion? No, that doesn't seem very plausible. See, we generate an explanation. Explanation one, nah, not that. What about lightning? Lightning hits things and it could, lightning, zap, some sand and there's a goat. Nah, no, no. And what you're doing is, he says, look what you're doing. Notice how all of these would fail to explain a watch. And so he says, well, what would you do? You'd say, oh, well, what explains a watch is an intelligent designer. I need that kind of explanation to explain the kind of complexity in design and fittedness to function of a watch. And then what Paley says is, we need the same thing to explain the goat. Now, until Darwin, that's a good argument. Now, here's what you need to know about this, okay? This is not an inductive argument. He didn't gather a bunch of goats together and then conclude from that God. That's not what? Goat, God. That doesn't work. It's not a deduction, God, therefore goats. Doesn't work. This is called inference to the best explanation, or somewhat confusingly, abduction, which sounds like something that aliens do to you. All right. Then how did Darwin argue in The Origin of Species? He said, wait, I have another explanation, and it's better than this one. Inference to the best explanation. It's better than this one. Why is it better? Because it's based on entities I can see, reproduction, competition, variation. And it explains not only good design, but bad design. Like, you have a nerve that goes all the way down and all the way back up. And it's really bad in giraffes because it goes all the way up and all the way down in their neck. It's like, what? Why is that? That's because you're the result of evolution. Gould, the panda's thumb. Pandas, they grasp bamboo and they look like they have a thumb. It's just this bone has become a little bit bigger. Bad design. You're filled with lots of bad design. Your breathing tube and your food tube are the same tube. So you know how people die? Eating their food. It's a really bad, having a baby. Until we had medicine, either the child or the mother would die in 25% of the times. Like, we figured out doors, take the child out, close the door. Like, wheels. Where are the wheels? Okay, do you see the point? And Darwin's theory explains both bad design and good design, because Darwin theory says all you need is a design that beats the competition. You don't need perfect or good design. So this is inference to the best explanation, and this is how most of science works. It's not induction, it's not deduction. To make it deductive, you know what I have to do? I have to generate all possible explanation. The number of possible explanations is indeterminately large. I can't possibly do it. We also make arguments by analogy. I compare a goat to a watch. It's not deductive or inductive, that's by analogy. I do argument by eduction. I look at a bunch of things and I say, oh, there's the pattern in there. So you have eduction, you have abduction, you have analogy, and we're doing this all the time to solve our problems. These are also considered reasoning, but they're all ill-defined forms of reasoning. Do you see? And so we have to be very careful to not hear logic when we hear these researchers saying reasoning. It doesn't exclude logic, it doesn't exclude probability theory, but it's not identical to that. It's a much more, general ability of enabling you to do things with your mind to solve problems. Is that okay? A lot of people think that what's being talked about here is just sort of logical ability. That's not the case. What immediately happened when Spearman produced all the evidence for G, and by the way, the evidence for this keeps piling up. It keeps, year by year, we keep getting confirmation, more evidence for G. Okay. So nobody denies that G is a thing, but there was initially a debate where some people said, it's just a statistical artifact. Like, what's the average number of kids? 3.5. So I should be able to go into a home and find 3.5 children. That's ridiculous. You know that's a statistical artifact. It's just a result of the way statistical reasoning works. And so some people are saying, G is not a thing, it's just a statistical artifact. I'm not going to go into the history of that debate because there's overwhelming consensus. See Deary's book on intelligence from 2020 or Heyer, Coleman, Hunt from 2024, The Science of Intelligence. Overwhelming consensus that G is a thing. It's not a statistical artifact. So it's pointing at something. So I'm not going to go into that debate because I think that debate has largely been resolved by the scientific community.
You're not everything you could be, and you know it. Would you like to develop a foundation of knowledge so solid that nothing could shake you? To learn about music, art, literature, mathematics, history, and biology, where can you find people who want to teach you at your speed about the topics you deem crucial so you could become the best that you could be? At Peterson Academy, we have 50 stellar 8-hour lectures already available, 4 more new ones a month. Consider deeply who you could be. Do your future self a favor. Join our thriving, ambitious community of 40,000 people.